Okay, it looks like we are on the air. Welcome to Evolution Hour here on the 6th of January 2025, a year of impending doom, as we shall unfortunately be discovering. And there we are. And don't forget our cute little WordPress.com. That is all open access stuff. Share those PDFs up and down and in and out of the yin yang. As you can see, we are back in Spokane. We have our little books to point to, etc., etc. And as of course, you will be aware. Oh, I put up my little chat window here. Voila. Get that other little feature. We are proceeding through the miscellaneous critters thing in Titans, that chapter, that catch-all thing with marine reptiles and eventually pterosaurs and all of that. That's relatively shy on technical material, as we will again discover this week. And this is another Casey Luskin week, so we'll have some more material on there. And to the great excitement of what I did over the Christmas holiday, a little sidebar on mystery adventures that will be available for anybody to follow up because they're available on YouTube. Hello, Lisa. The Nero Wolfe detective stuff. And I was amazed when I found out just exactly all that was going on, because I've been a Nero Wolfe fan for many a decade. Anyhow, first off, our little thing about pliosaurs. As we've been discussing, plesiosaurs, your classic Loch Ness monster, like critter with a long neck. Well, just take that bulky body with the little flippers, 4 flippers, and a little long tail, no little fin or anything on it, and swimming, in this mode. Swimming in this mode like a reptile. And take that little teeny head on a long neck, and get rid of the long neck and enlarge the skull, way bigger than what you would find on a plesiosaur. Hello, Barbara. As you can see, we're running the show. And there you have a pliosaur. These could get very large as well. It looks like most all of the very biggest marine predators during the Mesozoic got roughly up to the size of the biggest marine predators that we have currently, sperm whale scale. So the largest ichthyosaurs, the largest pliosaurs all fall into that frame. So that's an interesting feature, since they're supposedly the cold-blooded reptile thing as opposed to warm-blooded mammals. So it's very, in the case of ichthyosaurs, it's looking like they would be doing live birth in that, much of the way whales were doing. So they're not entirely sure all the little fun and games of what's going on inside of pliosaurs and the like. Not enough fossils, not enough fossil genie stuff for that. But we're here to talk about Sarfati and Tay, not going into the details. They make no hint whatsoever that pliosaurs and plesiosaurs might be related somehow, let alone nothosaurs and all the other little thors that are knocking around in the marine environment. So even from their own perspective, aren't giant squid bigger than sperm whales? No, actually not. Although the biggest squids could theoretically get almost up to the size of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea Nautilus predators. The vast majority are quite a bit smaller. What you do find, like from a long history of sperm whale sightings and whaling and the like, is that you would find examples in their tummies of digested or partly digested or just beginning to digest squids. And they can be of various size, but the whole body mass, remember, as invertebrates, they are long but squishy blob. They're not a lot of little bones in the little critters. There's also an indication that perhaps the sperm whales are using kind of a sonic shock that they can do with that big bulb in the front of their head, where they can send out a very powerful sonic shock wave that basically goes blah, 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 and while the squid is in yagada yagada, what am I doing mode, whoop, becomes dinner. Anyway, back to the little sidebar here. So there's a barramundi. theoretically there should be barramins, they're created types, but because whatsoever for them to work this out, even though there's a relatively small number of taxa compared to the other groups that they pay no attention to, which are the invertebrates and the insects and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, what we do get is a couple sources, which fortunately I was able to get both of them online for you kids. Some gee whiz allusions to how well they could swim. There was a robotic thing. Yes, exactly. You have the point precisely. That when you take the main body of a squid and all those little long tendrils that stake out, if you watch 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, you'll see the squid, although it's swimming backwards because it's kind of going towards as though the eyeballs were front, but of course it's using its jet propulsion to go the opposite direction. It's not entirely sure how dangerous a lot of the giant squids are, oddly enough. That Humboldt squid and much smaller ones are apparently much more aggressive and nasty than the giant variety. So, never underestimate small. Anyway, back to our little papers. So there was a 2006 paper from Long et al. That I'll be putting a link up to, which involved building a robotic mimic of swimmers that they could test out various models, because you've got different swimming modes between the way whales swim and the way marine reptiles do. As I said, the difference between this and this, the difference between using paddles versus tail propulsion. And so they had a little robotic thing that they were using to test out hydrodynamics and so forth and so on. And there was just kind of a side allusion to some of the paleontology aspects. So it's not really all that relevant, and certainly is not explaining how many barramins there are. And then there was a book chapter from way back earlier from Carpenter 1997 about how well they could possibly smell in water, and that they might have been using that as a hunting technique. But it, in fact, and it turned out to be available online, so I'll be putting the link up to that, so you'll be able to read it too. It's quite a nice little thing. They were venturing into some of that systematics, separating pliosaurs and the Elasmosauridae, which are the plesiosaur long-necky types, and suggesting that the longer neck mode evolved multiple times. So they weren't necessarily thinking that the earliest models were looking like that. But of course, none of that's being discussed by Sarfati and Tay. For sure, there's certain crackers would crush a human skull like an egg. Yes, yes. Even though it's taking some liberties with things, the wonderful squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Disney film, is still deliciously impressive, which, by the way, is deliciously impressive because they had to completely rechange how it was filmed from the original movie. They were Disney was extremely scrupulous about this, and he was trying to follow the book in every way. So the Nautilus was going to look pretty much the way it did in the storyline, and the big squid battle takes place at dusk. So the golden hour of the sun and all that kind of stuff, all taking it detail from the books. Well, the ship ended up looking way better and very different because Harper Goff, one of the production people at Disney staff, designed a new version that he thought would be better. And then they went away from the silver and into the brown look that's in the actual movie. And it's one of the classic designs for a motion picture ever. That's worth the price of admission. Plus, when you see it widescreen, you get to see the whole bloody submarine at once. And anyway, they started filming the daytime squid battle. And of course, they were using some hydraulics, but a lot of wire work and that to keep the tentacles going. And there's actually film footage on it on one of the DVD collections of it over the years. And holy shit, it's hideous. It's terrible. And when they were looking at the rushes on this, everybody involved, the director is just going, oh my God, this is not working. Disney is going, oh my God, this is not working. And so apparently, if memory serves me, the director and the screenwriter, their heads together and instantly came up with the solution they did in film, which was let's film it in a rainstorm with lightning flashes and all that. That'll hide the wires and all that kind of stuff, which meant completely rebuilding the damn squid because it was not designed to handle water. So they had to go through all of this, but there was a lot risking on the production by that time because he was just on a threadbare budget from the banks, and it was filmed in CinemaScope and stereophonic sound, and basically the studio was riding on the success of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And so to dive in and pull out even more money to refilm this sequence and do it up the way it was finally done, there you go. But anyway, the result is just an absolute masterpiece, and the only science fiction film that was ever done from the Disney studio during his lifetime. Anyway, yeah, Night of the Museum is fun too. Yes, in fact, that and the sequel, they're all absolutely delightful little movies. They're fun, cute pace. They've got fun cast, and that they're a good family entertainment show. Anyway, naturally, we're digressing, so this will make a perfect opportunity for digressing when I get to Nero Wolfe at the end of the show. Anyhow, so you've got a 1997 post and a 2006 post in the Sarfati book. Nothing that's going to lead anybody into looking too far, except that 1997 one where they were thinking, is there like some systematics involved here? So besides having those studies that we alluded to a couple of weeks ago when we were on vacation, we'll throw in a 2020 paper from Fisher, which is on the macroevolutionary landscape of short-necked plesiosaurians. Which again is delineating two distinct groups where there's convergent features emerging in them independently. The fossil record is detailed enough to be able to do that. Now, if you're holding your breath that Sarfati and Tay or anybody in the creationist baraminology movement is ever going to figure out how many baramins there are here and work out their kinds, stop doing that. Don't hold the breath. That's not a good idea. The second night at the museum had a giant squid. It's been a long time since I've seen him, so all I remember is the big tyrannosaur that ran around and Teddy Roosevelt and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, so this, as noted, is a Luskin week, and I'd already stocked up some material for this. There's 3 papers that I'll be alluding to, and it turns out all 3 of them hit the theodicy problem. So we're getting up to the point where like easily a third of the technical papers that they've been spooling out and that we've been looking at are hitting that problem. And none other than that one half-ass one is really supporting the primary contention of the intelligent design movement that a huge block of this air quotes junk DNA has function. So what are the 3 papers? Well, there's one from 2021 by Navarro et al. On the messenger RNA modifications, quote, and their alterations in human disorders, unquote. And again, discussing numbers that are consistent with only a tiny proportion of ALUs are showing up in this game. Remember, if you can have a situation where hundreds or even thousands of ALUs are implicated in this twisty-turny modification epigenetic process and all of that. But there's 1.4 million of them in the genome. So maybe when Luskin and others are looking at these kinds of papers, they're seeing these gross numbers, but none of their brain is going over and saying, but that's still a tiny proportion of the whole. That connection, I just don't think is happening in their head. Pliosaurs is a marine reptile. You just think of the main body of that Loch Ness Monster style plesiosaur and get rid of the long neck and vastly increase the skull. Bring that up to, well, frankly, sperm whale size skull, much larger skull. So whereas you have in the plesiosaurs a small critter on a long neck, and there's still some debate, and we've been discussing that in the previous shows, and that they might have been using them as like bottom feeding, and so that they would be kind of dangling down, and their relatively small neck would be picking up stuff that's in little troughs and stuff, rather than the giant boop, attack other large critter things. Because if you're big enough, the plesiosaurs are probably just piscivorous there, but they're not going after larger prey in the way the pliosaurs would. So pliosaurs are much more in the mode of the cetaceans like killer whales and others that are going after substantially large prey and in a very attack mode. And so they may be attacking other predators as well as other herbivorous fish. I'm not entirely sure what the term would be for non-carnivorous fish. Yeah, it's kind of a little sidebar, but every time I dive in about the material, and again, the advantage of putting these papers up in that is that it reminds me of just how much progress is being made in looking at all of the taxa available. Remember, all the plesiosaurs and pliosaurs and mosasaurs and all of these marine ginormous reptile, the marine crocodiles that were fully flippered, all of those that were going along in the Mesozoic, all extinct. And so the only thing you have at all to be able to analyze any genetic data would be looking at the crocodile genome. But they're over in the archosaurs, and I think phylogenetically, the pliosaurs and plesiosaurs and these marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs and others, are diverging much earlier than that archosaur bunch is developing that leads off into crocodiles. So it can only, it's that the crocodile genome would be more informative of birds than it would be plesiosaurs and pliosaurs. At least that's my suspicion on this. And if anybody has a sufficient sense of the phylogeny, or if Jackson Weed or others find out that, oh, no, that's not right, let me know. But that's my take on the kind of thing on that. So there will be this, the 2020 paper from Fisher will give you up to speed quite nicely on the technical material. Let me see if I've got the, no, I think I stuck that in the other room. So on to dear old Casey Luskin. So he's got the, oh yes, in fact, we are in Casey Luskin. So the Navarro paper is on mRNAs. There's a 2021 paper by Payer et al., which is specifically on ALU insertions and their role in disease risk. So we're right back again to the idea that although there can be a benign role for some ALUs, anything that can copy itself into the genome as relentlessly as ALUs runs a greater risk of gumming up the works. And then there's a 2022 paper from Auni, which is also on ALU editing and its ups and downs, specifically regarding bowel disease. And so the point is that, as I've been noticing, is kind of a recurring theme in the whole process of these ALUs, that there are mechanisms in place in the genome that deal with these little hitchhiking viral external DNA things and RNA, because they have to. A system develops that has to react to the thing, and it gets kind of used to doing it, but it has to continue running because these things are around, and if the system doesn't edit them out, they cause problems. So those will all be the little fun part to deal with. Let me put up also, since I do have my little file in here, let me thank our patrons who are helping us out month by month. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. And I well recognize colleagues, researchers, assistant researchers, friends, and our legacy patrons that it wouldn't surprise me if things get even dicier as to how many people can continue helping the project as we move into Trump 2.0. I'm not wanting that to happen. I want to see a flurry of more patrons coming in to help the project, especially if they take a note of how I'm making statements about what's going to happen regarding the economy. And if that actually turns out to be true, then you can all chalk me up as an incredibly prescient prophet who was able to spot the details of the doom. ALUs, oh yeah, that's one of those things that it's a something or other. It's a really long, murky little name, which is why nobody ever refers to it from that thing. So that one is literally one where I have not kept it in my brain pan. I'm not even sure that Jackson has it at the tip of his tongue is what it is. It's a really long, wacky little thing, which is why everybody uses the ALU abbreviation. But it's a relatively short strip. I think it's, oh gosh, something like 100 nucleotides or something like that. It's a relatively small chunk. And basically it has a readme or a copy me signal in the front that it's being reacted to anything when it comes into an organism. The organism is reacting by, oh, you want to have a copy made of you? Sure. And the machinery is completely brain dead. It's not intelligent, so it doesn't know that it does that. It doesn't know that I don't feel bad at all. Oh, yeah. Well, I bow absolutely to Jackson's proficiency on taxa names in particular, but the little molecules and things like that, that's not his direct field. But my gosh, he can just rattle off systematic names of critters that just I'm just gobsmacked on that. Once that I got back here, of course, he had just finished up his section of he had written his chapter on the transitions and stasis stuff, and then I had made my revisions to it, and then he was making his adjustments on that. And he also has dived into a new thing for him, which is to do info boxes. That was a new thing that he had not. All the info boxes that were in volume 1 were my structure of where when things got in a footnote that got sufficiently bulky that it's really kind of awkward and it's spilling over multiple pages, that's when we would graduate it up and turn it into an info box. And if it gets really big, maybe then make it into an appendix, which is part of what the procedure is. So there's kind of a pecking order on that. Anyway, all of these specific info boxes have been my doing in volume 1, but now he's done a couple on his own right on expanding stuff. He definitely wanted to rake Casey Luskin over the coals regarding a particular technical point that I just kind of alluded to it generically, but no, Jackson really wanted to go into much more detail of how Luskin, the digit identification issue regarding Tiktaalik, I mean, it is because Casey Luskin is an idiot on this subject. He's just incredibly obtuse, and Jackson wanted to make it painfully obvious exactly how obtuse he is. So it's a much longer section. That's very possibly it's going to end up as one of the longest info boxes in the thing. Then there's another one on a different topic later on in the book. Anyway, so we're having a field day working on all the little projects, and I'm about ready then to tackle with a vengeance my next main chapter, which is the cosmology stuff, Jason Lisle and all of that. It turns out it's nice that I waited kind of a bit because there's been some brand new papers at Answers in Genesis, of all places, of a bunch of creationists, and one physicist who apparently is now an ex-young Earth creationist. He's kind of vaguely intelligent design type who has now given up on the young Earth creationist side. And anyway, several of these people are writing papers in Answers in Genesis's Answers Research Journal criticizing Jason Lisle's latest theories on the speed of light stuff and all of that stuff and his cosmology model. So we'll be alluding to all of that in the new book. So we'll be nicely up to date on that. Well, my prediction is, first of all, you're going to have a certain on what's going to happen with Trump. But I've been, I'm a science fiction writer, and also a historian in that. So I kind of project out of things of what has happened before and what could be happening later and all that kind of stuff. And plus, I'm looking at the impact of the economic policies. So what you've got with the Trump base, you've got your Tony Perkins types who are impervious. I mean, they're like Mega Mike Johnson and others. These are young Earth creationists. Marjorie Taylor Greene. These are people who are not grounded in sound method. They have a top-down dogma. They're Tortukans up the yin-yang. So no amount of information is ever going to dislodge them. But there are certainly millions of people, roughly 10, 11, 12 million people who have been added on to the Trump vote from 2016 up to 2024. And maybe even a big chunk of the core Trump vote, who are not necessarily going to be happy when they start feeling the pain of Trump policies. And there was just a posting that I just responded to on Twitter from one of these giddy Trumpistas who's looking forward. They're going to eliminate the income tax, and they're going to eliminate the tax on Social Security and all, which is actually... I don't pay income tax on my Social Security at my level, but by eliminating it all across the board, it means that rich people will be able to not have to pay a tax on their ends of it as well. So there's ulterior motives going on in that Trump thing, which this numbskull doesn't know. Plus, not even the Trumpistas are proposing getting rid of the income tax, which if they did, you have some extremists, Alan Keyes and a few others, when they want to go to a sales tax or something like that, which is or excise taxes, which was basically how we funded our tiny little government back in the 19th century when life was miserable for regular people. So there again is part of that history stuff. But the notion that there's going to be wonderful good times and we'll be rolling back those prices and there's going to be cutting grocery prices in half and all that. Not only is that not going to happen, and nobody is going to be able to fulfill that. No Democrat, no Republican. There's no policies that you're going to do to have prices being rolled back. That is not what happens. When the Federal Reserve wants an inflation rate at 2%, ideally, that means prices are going up 2% a year. Still, and that's been doing that all my life. And so the idea that prices will go down again, normally you would take a depression to do that. But I think what we're going to find are depression conditions, but with inflation. So it'll be a roller coaster. It's not going to be fun. And this is going to hit a hell of a lot of Trump supporters in the why are prices not going down? Now, some of them will go conspiratorial and QAnon. They'll think that some cabals somewhere or other, Joe Soros is somehow keeping prices high. Who knows what screwball stuff is going on there. You could easily have things like that. Jewish space lasers causing the prices to go up. Could be a Marjorie Taylor Greene line. I mean, it'll be wacky. But yeah, we're all going to have to sleep in it. Exactly. So it's going to be a very bumpy thing. The one positive, one of the positive angles here is that if you have a genuine stock market crash, and so that's why I've reset my clock to 1928. If that's the case, you could have the first stages of it by the fall, especially when you start hitting all the impacts of the things that are just agricultural system. Idaho will be in a mess because of that. There have already been studies on this subject. Georgia, where Marjorie Taylor Greene's own district has a furniture manufacturer that's going to be in deep dire shit because they rely on an awful lot of migrant labor for their little factory things. And so it's going to be just across the board shit. And then if it's like the 1929-30, the big drops in the stock market took place in 1930. And that's when things just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Well, it means that an awful lot of billionaires and millionaires who are highly invested in the stock market are going to lose. Well, there were like several $1 trillion vaporized in the 2008 meltdown. And that was just a recession, kids. So you could have way bigger bits on that. Plus, idiot Trump is wanting to get on the Bitcoin bandwagon, which I think is the tulip bulb mania of our time. So who knows how many smarmy Vivek types are going to switch their portfolio of sagging stocks over to Bitcoin and then go down with the ship. So it's going to be an interesting time. So anyway, that's an excellent point about how double standard Mar-a-Lago and Trump is on this. Trump has been living in a little bubble world, and the fact is, far too many of these people and the influencers like Joe Rogan and all that have never lived in an environment where there's been bad economic times. The most they can have experienced in their lifetime is slightly less good economic times, recessions. And there have been varying degrees of them. The 2008 one was quite severe. It was the worst since the Great Depression. Other ones that I had experienced, the Eisenhower one in the late 50s. There was an expulsion of immigrants during that Eisenhower term, by the way. Are we getting a pattern here? The 29 stock market crash and the Depression, if it was following a closing of our immigration borders, we were no longer having open immigration. And then when the Depression hit, we put up enormous tariffs, the Hawley Smoot tariffs, which did not help. So we have a historical track record of how messy all of this stuff will be. But it not only can vaporize an awful lot of rich people, but also spur a degree of progressive reform in the way that happened in the 1930s. And frankly, the stuff that was in the early 20th century was because they were coming off of the Great Depression of the 1890s, 1893 to 97. That was caused from the Harrison administration, the not quite Donald Trump of the 19th century, where the Republicans had all the worst policy. So, yeah. There's an awful lot of money laundering going on. Plus, it's unbelievably energy hog. And so when you have a situation where energy companies have to decide whether or not they're going to serve their customers to keep their lights on in their houses versus funneling money into this thing to sustain this idiot Bitcoin mining, I think some of these things would have situations where some depression level economies would pull the plug on it, in which case, however much money is in that little Bitcoin processor, poof, disappears. So you're going to have messes up the yin yang. It's an unregulated thing. The Trump administration, the people are going to put in there, don't believe in regulating this at all. What could go wrong? Q 1932, 33. So yeah, anyway. So it's going to be very exciting and scary. I have at least the advantage here that I own my home. I don't have a mortgage. I have some things that I'm paying on my car, but that's all been rearranged through the credit union. So that's an automatic thing. I've got enough Social Security that I can hold on that. Let's hope they keep the Social Security intact and so forth and so on. And even if they put in some genuine nutcases running some of these areas, besides their incompetence and being at their Peter Principle level of incompetence, you've also got the fact that we have a decentralized system of courts and we have different states. So even if a Kash Patel decides to haul Liz Cheney in on some cockamamie charge, that doesn't mean it's going to hit even past a judge, let alone go to a jury. So it's going to be not necessarily freewheeling for them. But once you have, yes, yeah, there would be another matter. You've got a different dynamic than you had at that time. You have a European Union, which is not perfect, but nevertheless has a internal structure that's very different from the nation states of the 1920s and 30s that are politically as much of a screw-up mess then as Hungary and a lot of these places that have authoritarian regimes at the moment. And so will be an interesting measure to see. Yes. Well, exactly, I'm in the same case. Yes, and I'll tell you, there is another matter of where an awful lot of MAGA people who have grandfathers and grandmothers and elderly and all that are going to be changing their tune in a hurry if Gramps is suddenly impoverished. Because the reason why we have a Social Security system is it was to eliminate old age poverty, which was a common thing before the Social Security system. Another area, you got RFK Jr. If he gets in charge for some of the health matters and we get a bird flu pandemic or a few other things, and he tries to tinker with the measles vaccine and polio vaccines, I guarantee you that certainly in Washington state, our health department just won't pay any attention to him. We'll just go, okay, we're going to get this on our own. And so there will be, whether or not there's going to be matters of bootleg vaccines that and companies squirreling things and people importing them across the border from Canada and all of that in a weird replay of prohibition, we'll see. But it's going to be a bumpy, interesting road to the 26 midterms, assuming the emperor doesn't decide to try to abrogate that, which again, yes, yeah. So would it surprise me if things fall apart economically, that Trump might eventually be impeached by his own party, or because of MAGA people taking over his golf courses and burning his estates down? By that time, we're kind of in French Revolution territory. Who knows? It's going to be an interesting little mode. But anyway, on a lighter subject, Nero Wolfe. I've been a big Nero Wolfe fan, and I have all the Wolfe novels and all of that that I bought years and years ago. My mother was a great fan of them as well. That's before her eyesight failed. Those were some of the last mystery novels and that she loved to read. And they'd heard the little radio programs that were done. Sydney Greenstreet was one of the last ones that did the radio show. Yeah, still a matter of with the money available. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting things in terms of what's going on at the state level and local level. So it's interesting. Fortunately, I'm in Washington State, where we tend to be not quite so stupid as people say in Arkansas and Louisiana. Port Jackson, my co-author, lives in Louisiana, and so there's a different dynamic of what's going on down in that little neck of the woods. Speaker Johnson is from Louisiana, so okay, don't blame me. I voted for Harris. Anyway, that Nero Wolfe, for those unfamiliar, is one of the major mystery series. This is at the level of Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes and that crowd. And there's like, 70 some odd novels and short stories and things spanning the 1930s down to the 1970s. Wolfe is also unusual in the structure of the tale because he's an extremely corpulent, sedentary genius, irascible detective, and his assistant, Archie Goodwin, is the one that goes out and actually investigates things and gets in fights with thugs and so forth and so on. And yes, Oregon also is and California and the whole West Coast as a level of we're the productive blue states that have been subsidizing the red states, and if they start cutting back a lot of these aid programs, it means that we'll actually have a little more money in the blue states because we're not sending it to the unproductive red states, which would not be good for red states if we have an economic collapse. So anyway, back to Nero Wolfe. So I had seen the scattering of TV versions of this. There were actually a couple Nero Wolfe movies that were made back in the 1930s that were so disconnected. They weren't bad films, but they were so loosely adapted on the Wolfe things that Rex Stout never authorized a conventional movie again. And so I knew about what little I had seen of the thing. There was a abortive attempt to do a series with Thayer David. If you've ever seen the James Mason Journey to the Center of the Earth, the nasty barren sectism that gets falls to his doom later on in the story. And he was later an actor on the old Dark Shadows occult soap opera that was on television in the late 60s and early 70s. Anyway, he was not a bad choice to do Nero Wolfe, and they did a really nice adaptation of the one, The Doorbell Rang, where he snubs the FBI. So there was a political element to it. And I think Leonard Rosenman did the score for the series, and it would the movie, but and would probably have continued on as a series, except for the fact that Thayer David dropped dead after the show was made, and by the time it was aired in 1979, he'd already been dead. So that nicked in the bud. Then William Conrad, the Cannon guy, corpulent with a beard. Wolfe doesn't have a beard, but anyway, did a one-season thing that he was really expecting this to go off because there was just so many Nero Wolfe fans out there, and it wasn't a terrible thing, but they updated it to the modern world and that, and maybe only about a third of the episodes were actually based on any of the books, and they didn't do a terrible job of it. But anyway, it only lasted one season, and that was the end of that. And then the golden event happened in 2000, 2001 period, when A&E, in association with some Canadian producers and Timothy Hutton, the actor who helped produce the thing because he was going to play Archie Goodwin, did the series, and it was on for 2 seasons. And they ended up doing some 20 some odd of the stories, which is almost a third. They did a halfway's big chunk of the thing, and they set everything in the period. So the shows were in the 1940s or the 1950s, and they're the closest ones to this. Well, I was binging and checking up on research on the thing, and I discovered that a huge block of the stuff that you would want to know to get Nero Wolfe is available online. So it turns out all of the episodes from the A&E series are on YouTube. All of the canon series from 1981 is on YouTube. Watch the A&E one first. And then there were some just gobsmacking surprises as when I found out how many other series that had been done. I did not know that there were not one but 2 Italian TV series based on Nero Wolfe. They had him move to Rome, one that was done in the early 2000s, and then another one that was done about a decade or so ago, and a Russian series that did that. All of them were based on the original novels, and so they were all doing it. And unfortunately, none of the Italian stuff or the Russian stuff is available online. Then there's even some later novels that were done as pastiches with the Stout estate. That one of they're available as audiobooks, and one of the ones is actually posted on YouTube again. So I was listening to that, and they're okay. But the actor, the single actor that was doing all the voices, did a not bad job, but it's not as good as the Timothy Hutton A&E series. But then the little loose ends about the Nero Wolves that never happened. Charles Laughton was interested in doing Nero Wolfe back in the 1930s, but that never panned out. Orson Welles was interested in doing the series, but he didn't, or rather shows, but he didn't want to do a weekly series. He wanted to do kind of like isolated TV movies on the thing, and that didn't pan out either. And then there was a one episode pilot that was done in 1959 that is also available online, so you can see it. And the moment I found out who was in it, I'm going, where? And plus Alex North, the guy that did Cleopatra and so many different classic film scores, Spartacus and all of that, did the theme music, which is fairly innocuous. But anyway, Kurt Kasner, a minor but delightful little actor. The only major series that he ever did was Irwin Allen's Time Tunnel. He played this kind of semi-villainous. He played sort of the Dr. Smith kind of conniver that was in the series. Anyway, he was Wolfe. He had to pretty much wait for it. And the fact that he had a slight accent was not a big deal, and it was fairly well done. It was a black and white pilot. But guess who was to play Archie Goodwin? William Shatner. Okay, our number is moving forward, so we should be okay. And I think he's got a different toupee than what you see in Star Trek a few years later. But he had a kind of snarky banter style, which is very much akin to the way Archie needs to be played, which Timothy Hutton A&E series, and even one in the Thayer David version, the actor who played him has a certain snarky nature. So it would have been funky to have seen whether or not that would have worked out. And if it had been a highly successful series, it's possible he would have been in a TV series when they were doing the second pilot for Star Trek. And so he might never have been Captain Kirk had the Nero Wolfe series kicked off. Anyway, ironically, we saw at the time the series that went on in its stead, because CBS decided they didn't want to take the series. And they ended up with the Jackie Cooper Hennessy series. He was a sort of lightly comedic show. He was a guy in the Navy, and I think it was only on for a season or two. We were always a great Jackie Cooper fans, so it was fun to watch. But anyway, that was the time slot that would have had the Nero Wolfe series if it ever come out. So it was amazing how much of this stuff is available online, as well as if you poke around a little bit, you can find an awful lot of the radio series that was done in the 40s and 50s, including the Sidney Greenstreet episodes, which again were all of those radio ones were not based on the books, but at least for the Sidney Greenstreet ones, they're still fun episodes. They're not badly done. The thing that's so intriguing about Nero Wolfe is that he has a snarky, gruff, annoying, and verbose nature that there's no other detective like him. And in that very first episode of the A&E one, and the one that the Thayer David one on the same plot, the doorbell rang going after the FBI. There's one of the great lines in all of Nero Wolfe. Somebody is trying to offer him money for a particular project that he doesn't think he can pull off unless he was a miracle worker. And the way he put it was, "I'm neither a thaumaturge nor a dunce." Only Nero Wolfe would have ever used that kind of a phrasing. So he was absolutely hilarious. Yes. Of course, it'd have gone full civil war between Trump has even been sworn in. Yeah. He's grumping at the moment about the fact that the flags are going to be flying at half-mast during the inauguration because of the death of Carter. At least we'll know not to run them at half-mast when he finally drops dead, and we will not want to have him lying in state in the Capitol. So there. But that would be a more feasible outcome if Trump 2.0 has cataclysmically bad economic impact. Now, all of this, I can't venture at all as to what potential international implications are going to be coming on this thing. I like Kastner. Yeah. It's you'll have a lot of fun. It's you'll be able to just Google Nero Wolfe TV series and YouTube, and you'll bring up the little menus on the stuff, and there's various little spots on the thing. Occasionally on the A&E series, some of the opening sound on the credits kind of drops out once in a while, but it settles out once you get into the main television show. And so don't be discouraged by that aspect of it. But I was just absolutely thunderstruck. Oh, and the original movies that were done back in the 1930s, both of those are available on YouTube free. Where Edward Arnold played Wolfe with Lionel Stander playing Archie, and they gave him an idiot girlfriend in the first series, first film, and then when they made the second movie, they kept Stander and they had a different guy, Walter Connolly. All of them were not terrible. They're perfectly fine actors and all the rest, but they're not they're elements about too jovial and that they're not like Wolfe. Wolfe is one of the most fascinating, irascible, arrogant God. I mean, he can insult you with complete integrity, and he's having this love-hate relationship with Kramer, the inspector, and everybody. The cast, the A&E version is really any mystery lover has got to watch it. They're deliciously done. The hip style, the cleverness, what they did beyond the main characters that were all played obviously by the same people. They had an ensemble cast, and they were doing this often in the way that old movies were done. If you look at old Charlie Chan movies and that, you would be seeing the same little supporting players popping up playing different roles because they're stock players at the studio. And so they were doing the same little trick. So the actress that might be playing the femme fatale killer in one episode will be playing a victim in the next episode. And so they're like a fascinating bit to see all the different ranges of accents and styles and things that these various performers were doing. And but the guy that played Kramer is probably the best on the mark that I've seen. So yeah, they're absolutely delightful, and for the reader crowd, not always are the Wolfe books available. I was really lucky when I was collecting these things in the 60s and 70s that I was able to get the whole bloody series. There's also two other ones. Inspector Kramer has one of the stories by him, on his own, and then there was a female detective, Doll Bonner, that figured as kind of a side character in some of the Wolfe stories, and he did a separate novel based upon her as well. So anyway, if anybody is in there, if you're in someone like me, where you've got the Sherlock Holmes world, and then the Miss Marple world, and the Hercule Poirot world, and then you've got the little sidebar things of the Thinking Machine and all these other detectives, and then you've got in America, really the great American detective series is Nero Wolfe. So it's a fun thing, and there was always the political and the cultural aspect of things, where they would be talking about the issues that were going on at the times the books were taking place. And of course, the 1965 doorbell rang thing is talking about malfeasance from the FBI in a way that's pretty. He was deeply involved. Stout, as a writer, was deeply involved with the ACLU in that, although he did not have brownie point time during World War II when he was defending the Roosevelt administration for the Japanese internment. That's probably the darkest little spot on his reputation. But otherwise, it was an interesting thing. Never regarded Carter as a great president, but he was a great man. Yeah, I was not a Carter fan at the time, although there were a few people in the Carter administration and some specific policies I had no problem with. But Zinoviev, oh, I can never pronounce his name, from Brzezinski. He is Secretary of State. Good impression over the years, as opposed to Henry Kissinger, whose reputation marker is down and down and down and down and down, way below zero, well before his death. But as an ex-president, he was absolutely exemplary, and it was a decent person. One of the great ex-presidents of all time. Yeah, I'm as being an older fart, the first person I actually voted for was in the 72 election, which I had the choice between McGovern and Nixon. And although I was fairly conservative in that time politically, I didn't like Nixon. And so I, as a protest vote, because I was reasonably confident that Nixon would be reelected no matter what, which he was in a landslide. So I voted technically for McGovern the first time. I like McGovern as a guy. He was also a decent fellow and that, but I didn't like a lot of his policies. And then from that point on, for the Reagan years and the first Bush term, Ford, Reagan, and then the first Bush, I was in that GOP mode. And then what changed that was Clinton, by which time I was seeing policy problems. I had some, the big policy area that I was having problems with the Reagan administration was their Central American policy. And Elliott Abrams and that crowd, they were coddling up to dictators. I mean, it was not a nice thing, and ended up, with the Iran-Contra mess and all of that stuff. So anyway, an exciting time it was in there. But anyway, we can have some, if Jackson is planning on sidling into some political and cultural kinds of videos in addition to science material, and I will be one of the little technical advisors on the scripts on that. So some of that stuff may end up the little skittle bits of what was going on in all that historical past, because Jackson's in his 20s and I'm in my 70s. And so I have a direct experience of things that's just historical information for the young kids. Anyway, it's there are certainly virtually every president has ups and downs, and they have good sides and bad sides. And so I can rank some as more incompetent or more competent than others. But then you hit Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has zero qualifications. He is a convicted felon, a blithering idiot, the most ignorant person ever to be president of the United States, the most narcissistic, venal, corrupt, vindictive jerk. There's no counterpart. Everybody is a distant second. When you look at the temperament of LBJ or the narcissism of Teddy Roosevelt, it's but no, it's not even close to what you've got with Trump. So we're going to have Trump 2.0, and the poor kids who were expecting there's going to be wonderful nirvana and grocery prices are going to be cut in half. No. We're going to have a lot of shit hitting a lot of fans, and then we're going to have to get out and get off our duffs and get people online to have some genuine progressive reforms going on at state levels, local levels, as well as federal level, because there's just to resolve the housing situation and how difficult it is for people to afford housing. That's going to involve lots of deep regulation changes in how we do zoning, in how we do bank financing. There's a lot of stuff, and I guarantee you conventional Republicans aren't going to do anything on that. And Donald Trump and his oligarch greed bucket bunch are never going to pull any of that up. There's an awful lot I like about Obama. There's a lot of presidents who had who were underrated at the time. Chester Alan Arthur in the 19th century turned out to be a much more competent person that you would have expected on paper. Harry Truman had an awful lot of positive elements. Others had their downsides. The racism of Wilson acted as a nasty counterbalance to what was otherwise a highly progressive administration. So things are very complicated with people. But with Donald Trump, there is no upside. Everything about him is just a mess. And he has put forward arguably the most harebrained, brain-dead, stupid pile of jerks as cabinet and other officials. Even the ones that are semi-lucid, like Marco Rubio, I wouldn't see him as he's got foreign policy chops, but still, I think he's still out of his depth, and he's a theocratic ideologue, not that much different from Pompeo. So anyway, and the stuff the textbooks leave out. Yeah, well, Washington, complicated fellow. He has tremendous gravitas as a person, though, and Washington and Lincoln fall into the category of people who had just intense personal charisma. I think Lincoln instantly qualifies as the most brilliant person ever to be president of the United States. He was so brilliant that people around him didn't realize how brilliant he was because he was so clever at hiding it. Seward finally realized it at some point because Seward had an ego as big as Nebraska. and his Secretary of State. If you watch the wonderful Steven Spielberg film Lincoln, I think they get the personalities and the things of the various characters, although we're talking about the early in the second term there, 1864 era, 64, 65 era Lincoln. Still, it's a superb film and wonderful historical stuff. It's absolutely magnificent to watch. So, well, within the weird world of the Trumpista hyper-conservative creationist subculture, he has that intense self-confidence of a sociopath and a bullshitter. Remember, he was tutored by Roy Cohn, and he learned to do all of that, and you just keep blustering and blethering away. And remember, we have a terrible problem as a nation. Way too many people are terrible at source methods. They don't know how to fact check anything, and they listen to highly fragmented, insular media. This is not the era when huge blocks of people were watching CBS, Walter Cronkite, and David Brinkley on NBC, and Howard K. Smith on ABC. You now have umpteen little things where readership and viewership are down, and local newspapers have gone defunct or bought up by Sinclair or any of these other Gannett and all these other networks. And so there is a fragmentation and a disconnect of things. And many people are getting their news from TikTok and other things if they're in the younger group. And so they have they have a complete disconnect from important information. Even if they are NPR junkies, that doesn't mean that they're getting a lot of the background information they need on a lot of different subjects, unless they just happen to hit that little show of an inflation cycle or that. And so you have probably the least well-informed electorate of any in the last 100 years. And that's exacerbating circumstances, but they're going to get a 2x4 to the head as these policies kick in and things recalibrate. So bumpy times ahead, kids, bumpy times ahead. So let me put up the two brains stacked one on top of another. Yes, indeed. Yes. Abraham Lincoln, alien. Anyway, let me put my little Rocks Were There book advert on here. Come on. Get settled up here. There we go. And then we have to share our little screen. And then away we go. Let Peter's cute little ad strut its stuff. Lincoln's brother saved Wilkes's brother before the assassination. That's an interesting little factoid. Yeah. Well, there's a peculiar irony of a lot of these things. Anyway, partly the reason I brought up Nero Wolfe is that this is a free way for anybody that wants to kind of immerse themselves in the world of detective fiction, where villains get caught and justice is served and done properly and the right gets done. Nero Wolfe does that in spades, and it's an American thing, not British or somewhere else. So, and the fact that you can dive through so many of these things, that it's hours and hours. If you throw in the audio, although they're only half-hour episodes, all those old radio programs, I mean, there's like dozens of them out there. So that can fill out an awful lot of time on things that if you need to have a place to escape to, as we move into an exciting time, I can heartily recommend Nero Wolfe. So anyway, everybody stay safe. Watch out for the wooden penguins. We will be back next week, and stay safe. Watch out if you have weather. There's apparently all sorts of weather problems going on. Also, we have fairly mild weather here at the moment in Spokane and along the West Coast. So, yeah. So, oh yes. So those old Sydney Greenstreet era, that series was like 50-51. So it's just before the advent of television. There's big chunks of the playback that's available on that. Just, of course, it's only audio. And I think there's a chunk of the other radio episodes in that as well. It's available on other episodes. So you can kind of flit around and search on the Google engine and that and see what we're doing. So anyway, stay safe, everybody. And we will be seeing you all next week. In